The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we are gathered here to remember the life of Ron Rabinowitz, who we lost earlier in the week. And from a network standpoint, this is absolutely tragic, as it is from a personal standpoint with all of us. There are a bunch of folks here, and we will introduce them as we go. I'm going to start with Hal Bach. Hal Bach, welcome and thank you for being here. Hal, you wrote an obituary for Ron, and if you'd be kind enough to read it, we could respond to that, to your writing, and individually, let's throw in what Ron meant to us and how he affected us. We all loved him. So I'd like to introduce now Hal Bach.
Well, thank you, Ralph. It was a shock to learn about Ron's passing last week, and because he was on the internet, on the web all the time. He would report the Dodger scores every day, which I thought was kind of cute. What I did, I write a column for a website called New York Sports Day, and I wrote this column about Ron and his relationship with Jackie Robinson, and I'll read it and I'll let you guys respond to it. Jackie Robinson's arrival in the major leagues was met by a torrent of racial abuse for the first black man to break baseball's color line. There were verbal attacks, hate mail every day. And then there was one letter that was different, one letter that expressed support, one piece of mail that actually was a fan letter. David Rabinowitz, a civil rights lawyer and Democratic National Committeeman from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, sat down one day in 1953 and sent the letter to tell Robinson how much his son admired the Dodgers star. Robinson was so moved by that he answered the letter. He sent an autographed picture and a note that said the next time the Dodgers were in Milwaukee, he'd like to meet the youngster. And thus began a remarkable relationship between a major league star and a 7-year-old kid. On the Dodgers' next trip, David Rabinowitz took his son to the game. They waited outside the clubhouse after the game, and when Robinson emerged, Ronnie Rabinowitz introduced himself and said to Robinson, "Remember me?" The Dodgers star did, and urged the youngster to stay in touch. He did, addressing a letter in 7-year-old fashion to Jackie Robinson, Stamford, Connecticut, with no address and no zip code. It found its way to Robinson, and the player replied. Ron Rabinowitz and Jackie Robinson were now full-fledged pen pals. "We were so different," Ron Rabinowitz once reflected. "I was white and he was black. I was Jewish, he was Christian. I was a kid, he was an adult. I was from a little town in the Midwest, he was from a big city in the East. And yet, there was this bond of friendship and love." When Ron Rabinowitz turned 10, his dad took him to a Dodgers game in Milwaukee. Robinson homered, and as he rounded the bases, he waved to the youngster. That night, Robinson showed up at Ron's birthday party and sang happy birthday to his pal. Ron was flabbergasted and called it the best birthday of his life. There was a congratulatory letter for Ron's bar mitzvah in 1960, well after the Dodgers star had retired from baseball. They had created an unbreakable bond. There were dinners and frequent visits, sleepovers. When Robinson wrote to Ron, the letters always ended with, "Always, Jackie." Rabinowitz used that phrase as the title of a book, describing the relationship between two very different people who found a common interaction that lasted a lifetime. Jackie Robinson died in 1972 at the age of 53. Ron Rabinowitz died last week. He was 76. I'll leave it open to you guys to respond to that, whatever your thoughts are about what I've written. And it's not an obituary; it's a column, and it's a story of a relationship between two very different people who found mutual respect, mutual love, and it was something to be admired.
Okay, I want to start with David Hubler, because David Hubler covered Martin Luther King as an NPR person, and David Hubler can help put Jackie's life into perspective based on what Martin Luther King said of Jackie. And this way we can get a little idea of just what a hero Ron Rabinowitz picked. And Ron, for his whole life, carried on the legacy of Jackie. He wouldn't let people forget. He talked to kids and what have you, but what he was talking about was a great man. Can you elaborate on that, David Hubler? Please. Am I being heard? Oh, Lord.
I hear you. I don't know what anybody else is. Oh, okay.
David Hubler. Okay, you might have disappeared for a while, but we heard you. I'll ask Irene Hodges, who, first of all, Irene, thank you for joining us, and congratulations belatedly on your dad's induction to the Hall of Fame. Your dad was a teammate of Jackie's, and can you give us some idea of their relationship, Gil and Jackie, and tell us what a great man Jackie was, because we know what a great man your dad was. So if you would.
Well, I think you also know the Brooklyn Dodgers had a number of great men on their team. They were very fortunate. And Jackie, without a doubt, was certainly one of the great men in that era on that team. My dad loved Jackie. Jackie was like family to us. In spring training, his kids played in our house. We played in theirs. My father had a tremendous amount of respect for Jackie, for the man he was, and also because he saw firsthand what Jackie and his family went through, breaking the color barrier in the major leagues. But Jackie was a tough man. He wasn't easygoing, but he had a wonderful, wonderful heart. And Ron was so fortunate because he had a hero on the field and off the field with Jackie. That's without a doubt.
Okay. First of all, I want to interrupt a second. Thank you, How about?
Sure.
It was, I introduced it as an obituary. It wasn't. It was a column. And, but no obituary would have been better. You're a great writer, and we're very much appreciative. What are your memories of, Irene, what are your memories of Jackie's kids? As a child, you interacted with them, and any memories that stand out?
During spring training, because we all lived in the same complex. I mean, when we came home after spring training, we lived in Brooklyn. Jackie lived in Connecticut. People had their own lives. We went to school. But spring training was great. We always had parties. You know, they were always at our house. We had barbecues. My dad loved to fish. My mother loved to fish. They'd catch fish. My grandmother would clean it. Jackie would come over. His family would come over. Carl Ferrillo would come over. We'd have, my grandmother was Italian, so she'd cook for 25 people. But we were all family. There was never any difference. You know, the door was always open. You were always welcomed. You know, they'd play cards. My dad loved to play cards. They'd have card games. So it was just like family. There's no difference. And Jackie was such a good man. He loved my dad. My dad loved him before. Rachel and my mom were very, very close. My mom used to go, you know, in Florida at that time. Rachel would be able to go shopping and things like that. My mother would go stores for them. So it was a very sad and difficult time. But in our home and in the homes of the other players, none of that ever entered into our house. We were all family.
You know, can I just interject here? I think the remarkable story here is a major league star, and Jackie was a star in 1953. He had won the most valuable player in 1949. He had been Rookie of the Year in 1947. He was a star, and he responded to a 7-year-old kid, and they found a bond between them. Now, 7-year-old kids write to major league stars all the time. I wrote to Johnny Mize when I was a kid. Never got an answer. and I think generally ball players don't answer fan mail. They don't have time. They don't have the inclination. Jackie Robinson was a different sort of a guy, and he responded. He was touched by that letter from David Rabinowitz, Ronnie's father, and he responded. And it created a relationship that lasted his life, the rest of his life. And I just think that that's a real peek into the personality of Jackie Robinson, because most kids would never get an answer from a letter to a major league star. Ron Rabinowitz got an answer.
Well, he chose his heroes with well, let's put it that way. He had and you got to give his dad credit for that. That's a beautiful story too. Remember, Ronnie grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which, as we know, is not necessarily the most liberal of places, the Midwest in general. And Irene, your dad's a Midwesterner. What brought on his tolerance in life?
I think my father had respect for everyone. I don't think he was respectful of every person that he met, and even more so Jackie, because everything he had to endure. And he and Jackie, my father, Diana, he was Louisville. They were all, Midwestern, but it didn't make a difference. It didn't make a difference on that field or off that field.
Okay.
Well, I can also, let me say one more thing about Irene's dad. I was privileged to cover the Mets when Gil Hodges managed them, and he was the best. After games, he was receptive. It could be the worst loss you could imagine, but he sat there and he answered our questions, and he was just terrific. He was a terrific guy, and it made our job a lot easier, because I've had to deal with guys who were not so terrific, and Gil was special. And not that I didn't care very much for the Dodgers because I was a Giants fan as a kid.
Don't worry, we didn't care for you either.
Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate that.
Listen, I was brought up in a house that Halloween was almost sacrilegious because everybody, not everybody, my house, my family, hated anything black and orange. So.
My favorite colors.
I will be the antithesis to what you say. One of my earliest memories is after the 51 season. I'm 5 by that time, and it's Halloween time. And what do I know? My grandfather took me to the Polo Grounds before Willie was called up and after Willie was called up. So the black and orange was like a ritual. You'd see with the orange bill on the top, the orange, what do they call it? The thing. It was, to a kid, it was just the opposite of what you saw. And I went to Alexander's with my grandparents, and they were all decked out for Halloween. And I looked at the crepe paper and all. I thought, wow, the season's going to start again. So just the opposite. I'm with Hal Bach on this one. But, you know, we love the memories of these people just as much as Davy Williams or Monty Irvin. I mean, it's God. This is. I wish Ronnie were here for this. He would add to it. I'd love to hear him again. And it wasn't just the Dodgers. He had tremendous loyalty. He was a Twin fan. And George Case can tell you about shows that we did on the Washington Senators and Twins and how much Ronnie added to it. George Case.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ralph. I've enjoyed, listening to some of the stories, and Hal, you did a wonderful job in your article about Ronnie, and Irene, you and I share something. My dad was a Major League ball player as well, so I appreciated your comments, and we had many similar experiences. With Ronnie and the Twins, I didn't realize it until we started to have these podcasts, and Ronnie was such a huge baseball fan, and we talked about, the relationship with Jackie and the Brooklyn Dodgers, and one day we started to talk about Minnesota, and Ronnie was living in there and in that area. And I just happened to tell him, I said, geez, Ronnie, I said, we do have something in common, beside baseball. The fact is that my dad was the third base coach for the Minnesota Twins in 1968. So, we talked about baseball. Ronnie was, very, very knowledgeable. And we also talked about politics. And I was fascinated because with my dad playing in Washington, politics and baseball went hand in hand. And here was Ronnie as a young man meeting our late president, John F. Kennedy. And I just happened to also be at the opening day ceremonies in Washington when President Kennedy threw out the first ball, and I was sitting in the dugout, suddenly surrounded by Secret Service agents demanding to know who the hell I was. And as President Kennedy was sitting almost next to me in the presidential box, about ready to throw out the first ball. So Ronnie and I had many discussions about baseball and politics, and I really enjoyed speaking with Ronnie, and I was as shocked as anybody else when I learned of his passing, and we've lost a real good one.
Yeah.
Irene, let me ask you a question that I've been thinking about. Could Jackie Robinson, the Branch Rickey experience, have happened in any other city but Brooklyn?
No, I don't think so. I
Okay.
I think this was the perfect place. The perfect place for Jack. I think the team was the perfect team. He was the perfect fit. And New York, tough. New York, tough. I'm not saying that they aren't. And I know of certain things that, things that were said in the stands and things that were done. But, they all had his back. There wasn't one player on that team that was not there for Jackie 100%. So I'm not sure that would happen any other place, but I know it happened here for sure.
Okay. Jackie changed minds. Let me just interject that it wasn't always easy. The Dodgers weren't 100% receptive, and there were some folks on the Dodgers, some players that even went so far to sign a petition, and it didn't go very far as Branch Rickey was concerned and Leo DeRocher, but one of the players that signed the petition was a fellow by the name of Bobby Bragan. And Bobby Bragan not only had his mind changed by the experience of knowing Jackie Robinson, but he went on to manage a whole bunch of stuff. He scouted. He was what they call a baseball lifer. And Bobby Bragan was instrumental in Maury Wills's career. He turned a 9-year minor leaguer into an all-star shortstop for the Dodgers. So, the switch hitting and was it. But the fact that Bobby Bragan was coaching a black person years later in the minors and mentoring a black person, started out signing the petition to keep a black man out of baseball. Just imagine the effect of Jackie Robinson in that case. That's just my 2 cents. I want to ask Alan Blumkin. You were a Yankee fan.
Yes.
How did you get to know of Jackie's legend as a kid?
Because the Yankees play the Dodgers in the World Series almost every year.
Okay.
I hated the Dodgers, Jackie Robinson and Campanella and Newcomb, not because they were black, but because they were Dodgers. And it took me, those years I was, I'm 70, going to be 79 in a couple of weeks. Those years I was growing up. I was 14 years old when the Dodgers moved out of Brooklyn. I didn't want them to leave. But basically, the more and more I got into, the history of it, and the less and less I had a totally partisan view, the more and more, the more and more I respected what Jackie Robinson had done. And the thing that put me over the line was all the crap that Henry Aaron went through when he was going after the 715 home run. 715 home runs. Then I started reading biographies of Jackie, and and then I realized that he probably passed away so young because he was diabetic. I'm sure the hell that he went through in 1947 and 1948 was a big contributor to it. And they stopped throwing at him when Newcomb came up to the Dodgers in 1949.
Okay.
But he had a tremendous impact. I didn't have that much contact with Ron, but the contact I did because he had a couple of hospitalizations before last week, and I've been through the mill physically over the last several years, and so we used to communicate on the Facebook Messenger back and forth. And anytime I put down, I want to wish all my Jewish Facebook friends Happy New Year's or Happy Passover or whatever, he would always respond on Facebook. And we had some nice conversations on Facebook Messenger. The few podcasts I did with him, he seemed to be one of these rare people who nobody ever had anything bad to say about. Sort of like Yogi Berra and Stan Musial.
What I find remarkable, this is Hal, what I find remarkable is that Ron was growing up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, the middle of nowhere as far as I'm concerned, and yet he fell in love with Jackie Robinson. And I'm curious as to what it was about Jackie that attracted Ron so vehemently.
Well, Hal, didn't you write that his father was a civil rights lawyer?
Yes, that's true. That's
probably is a pretty big influence as far as I can see.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But still, I mean, he was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Jackie was in Brooklyn, New York. That's a long ways away, and he had a Milwaukee team that had Henry Aaron. I believe Henry Aaron was in Milwaukee by then. He's another black man.
He was in Milwaukee in 1954. Was his rookie year.
Okay, 54.
Yeah. But one other thing I want to mention about Ron, the link was put on to Ron's appearance on the Larry King show, and I watched that shortly after he passed away last week, and it was wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, I just watched it yesterday.
Yeah, all you have to do to access it is you go into YouTube, you put a search on Ron Rabinowitz, and you can find that there.
Okay. Hey, Bernie Rose, I heard your voice say that you and Peter Trunk, who is here, did many podcasts with Ronnie about the old Brooklyn days. And I wonder if you two would talk to each other about your experiences knowing Ronnie through the podcast network, such as it is. And not such as it is. It's pretty great, by the way. Comfortably Zoned. All of our 3,000 plus offerings are archived on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and punch in Comfortably Zoned, and then punch in any of the names, you'll come up with some great shows. Ronnie has done hundreds of hours. Hal Bach has done hundreds of hours. Alan Blumkin has done hundreds of hours. Even Irene, I don't know if you remember appearing with us on one or two podcasts.
I do. It was a number of years ago, but I do remember it.
Okay. We enjoyed your company. George Case has done hundreds of hours. And I'm going to talk to George Grimm in a moment and have his response. Ronnie contributed to a book that he and I, George Grimm, wrote. And after Peter and Bernie Rose, it's not Peter, it's Peter Trunk and Bernie Rose, talk about podcasting with Ronnie, I'll have George Grimm talk about what he got from collaborating with me on the book and talk on Ronnie's contributing to the book. So first Peter Trunk and Bernie Rose. Start with Bernie. What's were going through your mind right now?
Well, I would like to say that in reading your book, I feel like I know all these people on the phone, most of you. Even though I've never spoken with you or met you, but it's a great book, Ralph. And a lot of the people on the phone are in that book, and it's very interesting.
Yeah,
But,
well, the book what makes the book great is the contributions from the people on the phone. So it's
well, right.
And I will never forget their contributions, and I'm eternally grateful to them. And George will talk more about that after you and Peter Trunk talk about Ronnie as a podcaster.
Well, I got to know Peter and Ron on the phone doing the podcasts, and boy, we message a lot during those Dodger playoff games. And I had a couple of conversations with Ron, aside from that, and you could just see. All you have to do really is look at some of these look at some of the things online, like with Larry King, or read his book, or see anything that he's involved with, and he comes across just the way he comes across on the phone. I mean, he was just a hell of a guy, and he didn't really know me, but from the very first time we were on the phone together, it was like we knew each other for years. Peter, am I right?
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
You see, Peter Trunk, what was your first experience with Ronnie? How did you meet?
Okay. First of all, I have to thank you, Ralph, for everything. And by that I mean getting involved at all with either the radio show, and then you convinced me to go ahead and do my TV show, which is the YouTube show, which I do, by the way, with Robert Cole, who is here tonight online. Robert Cole is my partner, along with Ron Rabinowitz, and Bernie was always a contributor, and he was a guest. But let me just tell you something about Ron Rabinowitz. Ron Rabinowitz is one of those guys that's too good to be true. All right, he really was. He was like, people talk about, they say, oh, this guy, you watch TV and you see these shows and you go, this guy didn't have anything wrong with him. When he walked into a room, everybody thought it was the greatest thing. He didn't have anybody who said anything bad about him. And you always take that with a grain of salt and stuff. Hey, look, I'm 75 years old. I take it with 2 grains of salt. But Ronnie Rabinowitz, there is nothing anybody could say negative about Ronnie Rabinowitz. Nothing.
He was absolutely real.
Not only was he real, Ralph, I consider you real, and I consider me real, but Ronnie Rabinowitz was without a fault. Ronnie Rabinowitz could make a person feel like they were his best friend.
Absolutely.
And you want to know something? Ronnie Rabinowitz probably made 100 people feel like he was his best friend. I've gotten phone calls. I've gotten messages. I've gotten all kinds of emails since Ronnie passed away from people, some of them I never heard of, that said Ronnie was my best friend. And you want to know something? That speaks volumes about Ron Rabinowitz. Ron Rabinowitz was unique. And Robert Cole can back me up on this 100%. Robert Cole does every single show that I do with Ronnie Rabinowitz called Dodger Baseball Chronicles, which also can be found on YouTube. Dodger Baseball Chronicles. Ronnie Rabinowitz did all of the shows, 100% of them, and he was the soul. He was the heart.
He was everything. I mean, I heard Irene talk. I heard everybody talk about, Gil Hodges, who was, let's face it, there's not too many people in the world ever that were like Gil Hodges. And yet, I think Ron Rabinowitz was every bit of what Gil Hodges was. And that is a perfect man. He was perfect. He never had anything to say negative about anyone. Politically, he was a liberal like I am, but he never castigated anyone, ever. And I spoke with him the night he died. Linda and I, my wife Linda, were on the phone with him. He was in the hospital, and we were talking with him. And he was short of breath and everything. And after we hung up, that's when he passed away. It's just unbelievable that he's gone. I can't believe he's gone. I can't believe that he's gone. He was unbelievable. He was better. He was better than everybody said tonight. Everybody said he was so great. He was better than that. He was unbelievable. I can't talk anymore, but I will send it back to either Robert Cole or
Robert
Ralph.
Cole. Robert Cole, take it if you would.
Yeah, sure. The thing about Ronnie, okay, it was just not with the podcast. Peter and I knew him. We knew some of the other people that knew him. He had guys that were politically opposed to him, and he, like Peter said, he never said a bad thing. Peter and I would try to convince him to unfriend some of these people, and he wouldn't do it. And he just was very gracious, just a really, really nice guy. And, knew his baseball, loved the Dodgers. In fact, right up to a couple of days before he passed away, he was still putting the Dodgers scores. Dodgers win. Dodgers win. And, so Peter said, to find out that, he had passed away like that, that's why it's such a shock. Even though we knew he was in the hospital, just the way it happened is very shocking. But he was genuine, okay? And I don't think there was a bad bone in his body, and I don't think anyone, like Peter said, say anything bad about him. I mean, everybody that's here, some people didn't even talk to Ron all that much, and yet he made an impression on them. That's just the way he was. He was a born salesman. Okay, that's what he was in life. For 20 years, he was a salesman, and he sold himself to everybody in a good way. I mean, I don't think anyone has anything bad to say about him.
Well, I'll tell you what, it warmed my heart every time Ronnie would show pictures of him talking to kids at events. He did this regularly in Minnesota. And, the kids' response to him, they look up at him, and he was carrying out the legacy of Jackie. And I will, on behalf of the network, swear that we will never let Jackie's legacy die in honor of Ronnie. And we will do everything we can to remind people how baseball was in the prehistoric days. And that's what I consider them. Baseball, he revolutionized baseball. Let's put it that way. And he revolutionized the civil rights movement. And what I thought I heard David Hubler, but I wanted to tell you that Martin Luther King once said that it wasn't him when somebody credited him for being the grandfather of the civil rights movement. It was Jackie. That's Martin Luther King talking. Because baseball, it commanded something back in the day when there were 8 teams in each league, and no other sport came close to having the impact. You wouldn't miss a World Series game. You wouldn't miss an All-Star game. And things have changed, and we will continue to, the network, we will continue to keep, like I say, Jackie's legacy alive in honoring Ron. That's the best we can do. And we will never forget you, Ron. I know you have had one of those personalities that was just special. Peter, thank you. Robert Cole, thank you. Irene, thank you. George Case, thank you. Hal Box, thank you. I wish David Hubler stayed on. Alan Blumpkin, thank you. Anybody I'm missing? Bernie Rose, thank you. Anybody I'm missing who I haven't mentioned just now? This will always remain one of the saddest shows / happy shows I've done. It's hard to find happiness in sorrow, but that we got to identify what Ronnie was is happy bringing, heartwarming, and happy bringing. We love you, Ronnie. Anybody else have anything to say?
Yes, Ralph. This is George Grimm.
Oh my God, George Grimm. Grimm.
I just want to say that Ronnie was a quiet gentleman with a great story and a wonderful way of telling it. And his loss is just one link, to baseball's past that we'll be missing. And it was always an honor to speak to him on the podcast, and then later on to put his podcast words into the book. And I will miss him. He was a nice man.
Yeah. You were the last person I wanted to forget, George, because you helped complete my life and Comfortably Zoned by putting the chronicle of what we do into words. Love all of you guys. Thank you so much. Irene, keep coming back. Don't be a stranger.
Thank
you so would you pass on my congratulations on your dad's induction? Would you pass it on to your mom and your brother?
Ralph, like that of all of us.
I will.
Yes.
Thank you. And I just want to say one thing. I know what it is to lose someone so quickly and devastating loss to those around him. But I can tell you from experience, you've gained so much from that man, from Ron, that losing him still will always be with you. So you're all our lives are enriched from him. So I can tell you from losing my dad 50 years later, my life is still part of his. So be grateful that you knew him and you were fortunate enough to have him in your lives, because you'll always keep that.
Good. I'm going to end by using Ron's expression. May his memory be a blessing. It never was so real. We love you, Ron. Thank you, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and
thank you all.
We did what we could. We understated everything we said about Ron. Let's put it that way. There was no exaggeration whatsoever. And thank you for joining us on Comfortably Zoned. Thank you for listening, everybody. And please be well. Sei gesund. Adios.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.